back to week 2 of Inhabit. And today we continue in this foundational part of this series where we're really exploring habit science. In other words, the way that we've learned that habits really are formed in our lives. Methods, the methodology even of how to make something habitual. And so today we're going to be inspired again by this book, Atomic Habits, that you can find in our resource center if you want to dig deeper into that. But we're going to share some of those principles with you today and even show how those tie and correlate to a scriptural perspective.
Yeah, because it's not technically a Christian book, but both of us, when we read it, were like, this goes so well with these formational habits that we're trying to invest in our lives, or invest our lives in. And so, he walks through, and the guy's name is James Clear, and he wrote this book, and in the book he wrote about 4 laws that correspond with the 4 steps that every habit goes through, right? It's like a cycle that every habit has. Every habit has what he calls a cue, and we'll go through each of these. Every habit has a craving and a response and then a reward at the end. And so no matter what habit you want to talk about, whether it's...
I've got one we can talk about.
Really?
Yeah. So let's see how this applies. These laws might apply to this habit that's been formed in the Rabine house. Every Friday has become known as Carpe Donut Friday. Instead of Carpe Diem, get it? Yeah. Right. So, yeah.
Should be a t-shirt.
It was a t-shirt, actually. Initially, I went to a comedian. It was like a Christian stand-up night. And the opener talked about Carpe Donut, and he sold a shirt that said Carpe Donut. Inspired the whole thing. And it's become a whole thing. It's a habit in the Rabine house now.
So what is the cue, the obvious cue that triggers in the Rabine household, it's time for donuts?
I mean, I guess at one point it was the shirt, but that's the beauty of this. When something becomes so habitual, we don't even need the shirt anymore. But it is the calendar, right? It's Friday. We know when Friday's coming. Now, my youngest daughter, Hope, is admittedly the most passionate alongside of me about Carpe Donut Friday. The other two in my house just kind of come along for the ride. But Hope and I look forward to Friday. We start anticipating Friday coming along because we know what Friday morning will hold.
Start licking your lips on Thursday night.
It's the cue. And the craving kind of brings up.
Craving.
It is,
so the
right?
next step is that cue usually triggers a craving of some kind. So for you, it's like, I want to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, even it can start on Thursday night. I'm tucking Hope in, and she's like, tomorrow is Carpe Donut Friday, And I was like, do you want your usual or do you want something different? Well, she goes through phases. I mean, I have my cinnamon sugar knot and the mini Cinny. That's the common thing for me. Hope we'll go sprinkles sometimes chocolate Long John, sometimes the chocolate twist. Wow. Always a blueberry cake, though. This is consistent for her. See, they're in there. It's craving. There's craving for those specific things.
All right. So once you have a cue that triggers a craving, then there's the response, which I guess we think of as the habit, right?
It is, which is the getting up on Friday morning and getting in the car and driving to Polly's Donuts. Sitting in the drive-thru no matter how long it is. And hoping they still have the cinnamon sugar, not because I'm really craving it by that point. They only make a handful of them. So please save those for me on Friday.
Oh, okay. Good note. And then there's the reward that makes you want to do this habit all over again.
It's pretty clear in this case, right? What the reward is. Now, that's what is interesting about spiritual formational habits might not be as instantaneous in their reward, and we might talk about that a little bit more. But obviously, in this analogy or illustration of how this works itself out, the reward is pretty instantaneous. That bite into the donut with a hot cup of coffee, it's good.
Yeah, a little dose of sugar. Always do it. Okay, well, so this week our bottom line has to do with that first step, the cue. And the law is make it obvious. Right? That's the if you're wanting to develop a habit, like we're going to be talking about over the next 9 months, then you need to make it obvious.
You want to be cued
Yes.
by something, if it's something we're striving toward or that we're committed to. How can we make that obvious in our day? I mean, one thing that's become habitual, whether we meant it to or not, a lot of times is like our response to our phone.
Yep.
That's because phone creators or technology creators of phone have figured out cues, right? Ways to cue us to make something obvious. So if we feel the vibration in our pocket,
And all of a sudden we have a craving.
It's cute, the craving,
We want to
respond, and the reward, comes from knowing, the post
Whatever
or the like or whatever it is.
Yep.
But it's another example of that. But how do we make something obvious?
Right.
Our own haptic, if you will.
And the passage of
things
scripture
like that,
that
yeah.
just read talked about how the Jewish people made it really obvious.
Yeah, absolutely. Gave ideas about keeping these things before you, posting them, at your entrance and exits.
Tying
and
them on.
Tying them on to you. Binding
Doesn't get
them
much
to
more
you.
obvious than like on your forehead. It's like-
Right. And really there's a beauty in the Jewish way of life. They were a group of people who maybe in particular held prayer at a very high premium, but one of the ways that was accomplished in that tradition was there were cues. Different parts of their day cued a particular prayer, a particular response to commune with God. There were fixed hour prayers, so at 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. and 6 p.m., right? These were moments of you're going to pray. There were specific things you would pray at those times. There were different just ordinary moments through their day. If you got new furniture, there was a prayer for that. If you went to the market and, were kneading bread, there's a prayer for that. If you're going to synagogue, there's a prayer for that. When you're going to bed, there's a prayer for that, right?
Yep.
They allowed just the ordinary coming and going of their day to provide cues that built a spiritual habit into their life.
So they did that all the time in their lives, and what they were kind of actually doing, the way that the Atomic Habits book labels it, is sort of like habit stacking. There's these things that you're going to be doing in your day-to-day life, so build God habits into the rhythm.
Right.
Stack them. So he calls it habit stacking, and you've got a handout today that you can look at, and he shows like a bunch of modern day examples of ways you can do it, and there's a diagram that takes you through, like there's a cue, a craving, a response, a reward that takes you to the next habit, and you go through that. And so it's a way of building habits. Sometimes this really helps make it a lot easier, really, because instead of having to just start from scratch on something to find a cue, like to make it obvious, just attach it with another cue, like brushing your teeth. Like, hey, I'm brushing my teeth, and I'm going to do this next.
I actually experimented with that. For Christmas, I, for the first time, got a electric toothbrush or battery-powered toothbrush, My parents love gadgets, and they got that for us for Christmas, and I was a little put off by it at first. Like, my regular toothbrush is just fine, thank you. I have to admit, I don't think I can ever go back to brushing with the regular toothbrush. But here's the thing. That I found, of course, you got to brush your teeth after Carpe Donut Friday, right? But I digress. But the idea was that when I was reading Atomic Habits earlier on the year, at the first of the year, after I got this toothbrush, I was like, well, I'm already doing this. Brushing my teeth is already a habit. So that became a cue to actually recite scripture while I have my 2-minute brush going now as a timer. So there's a cue for me to be reciting the scripture I'm trying to memorize.
So how does that sound? Well, you got like the bzzz, and you're like...
It's in my head.
Oh, okay.
I'm internally... It's not audible.
Got this image of
recitation.
Andrew, like, spewing
That's
toothpaste
that would be ugly. That would not be rewarding for anyone. Yeah.
So that's the idea of habit stacking. We also wanted to mention that with every one of these laws, there's a law reversal that helps with getting rid of bad habits instead of implementing new habits. And they're worth mentioning because they're really powerful tools.
Right.
Let's admit it, all of us have some bad habits, right? You do, I do, everyone, we've got some. So this is a great tool for it. So if we reverse this law, it would be to make it invisible. So whatever the cues are that are triggering that habit, well, make it invisible. So our family actually kind of stumbled onto this when we moved, somewhat intentionally stumbled onto it. So when we moved here, we were moving into a new house. We had to figure out where to put all the stuff. And one of the things that we decided was this new house has a loft, and it's got a staircase that's kind of uncomfortably steep. I don't think it's up to code. And we decided, what if we put our TV up there? How would that change our day-to-day rhythms? And it's been pretty neat. We put the TV upstairs, and really we spend most of our time down in the living room, and there's most nights that we don't even think about it, much less go up there to see it. And it's changed our habits just by moving the location, just by making it invisible.
Less obvious, making it invisible most of the time, right? So this makes sense. If it's something we want to do, we set it before us. We make it more apparent to give us that cue.
Right.
If it's a habit we want to break, we make it as less accessible as possible.
So you're pretty safe though with the donut habit because you've attached it to a day of the week, and you can't really make Friday invisible.
It always comes back. That's right. It always comes around. That's not a habit I'm looking to break anytime soon, Neil.
Okay.
Anytime.
Well, you're good to go. And so are y'all, so have a good discussion.